Every day, more than 3 million people pass through Shibuya Station. It is one of the busiest transit hubs in the world, a place of departures, arrivals, and the relentless movement of modern urban life. And in the middle of all that movement, just outside the station's west exit, there is a small bronze dog. Tourists photograph it. Couples use it as a meeting point. It appears on postcards, in travel guides, in the opening scenes of documentaries about Tokyo. Most visitors spend 30 seconds in front of it, smile, and move on. But the Japanese who pass by Hachiko every day, the salaryman catching his morning train, the high school student rushing to cram school, the elderly woman walking to the market, they carry something different with them. Not a photograph, a feeling. Something between reverence and sadness, and quiet recognition. This video is about that feeling, and what it tells us about Japan. The story of Hachiko arrived in the West largely through a single film. In 2009, a Hollywood production called Hachi, A Dog's Tale starring Richard Gere, retold the story of a loyal Akita dog in an American setting. It became one of the most watched family films of the decade, and introduced Hachiko to audiences who had never heard of Shibuya Station. The film was a remake of a 1987 Japanese film, Hachiko Monogatari, which had been a major domestic hit, one of the highest-grossing Japanese films of that year, a story that made entire cinemas weep. For international audiences, Hachiko became a symbol of pure, unconditional love, a dog waiting for its owner. A beautiful, tragic story. Something to share on social media with the caption, "This is why dogs are the best." But in Japan, the story never worked that simply. Hachiko was never just a dog. He was a mirror held up to something the Japanese felt deeply about themselves. Here are the facts, as precisely as history can give them to us. In 1924, a professor of agricultural science at Tokyo Imperial University named Hidesaburo Ueno adopted an Akita puppy. He named him Hachiko, the suffix ko being a common diminutive used in names at the time. Professor Ueno lived in the Shibuya neighborhood, and each morning Hachiko would follow him to the station. Each evening, Hachiko would return to the station exit and wait. On the 21st of May 1925, Professor Ueno suffered a cerebral hemorrhage while teaching at the university. He died that afternoon. He never came home. Hachiko was 9 months old. He continued to go to Shibuya Station every day. Around the time his owner's train would have arrived, Hachiko appeared at the exit and waited. He did this according to the records kept by station staff and vendors for 9 years, 9 months, and 15 days. When he died on the 8th of March 1935, his body was found on a street near the station. An autopsy revealed he was suffering from terminal cancer and filaria infection. He was approximately 11 years old. And in his stomach, they found 4 yakitori skewers, food fed to him by the vendors who had watched over him for years. This is the story, not softened, not simplified. Hachiko did not become famous immediately. For years, he was simply a local fixture, a quiet dog known to Shibuya Station staff and the surrounding vendors. He was fed scraps, given shelter in cold weather, looked after by the people of that neighborhood. It was not until 1932 that the story entered national consciousness. A journalist named Hirokichi Saito, who happened to be an Akita dog enthusiast, wrote an article about Hachiko for the Asahi Shimbun, one of Japan's largest newspapers. The story spread rapidly. What followed was extraordinary. Hachiko became a subject of national fascination while he was still alive. School children wrote essays about him. He was discussed in ethics classes as an example of Chugi loyalty and devotion. In 1934, a bronze statue was erected outside Shibuya Station in his honor. Hachiko himself attended the unveiling. Here is what matters. This was not just an animal story. Japan in the 1930s was a society moving rapidly toward militarism and nationalist ideology. The concept of loyalty to one's superior, to the emperor, to duty, was being mobilized for political purposes. Hachiko fits seamlessly into that narrative. He was used in textbooks. He was cited in speeches. He became, in a very real sense, a piece of state symbolism. And then the war came. In 1944, as Japan's war effort required metal, the original bronze statue was melted down, donated, like countless household items and temple bells, to the war machine. The meeting place remained. The dog who had inspired it was 10 years dead, but people still gathered there. In 1948, citizens of Shibuya raised funds to replace the statue. The sculptor was the son of the man who had created the original. Hachiko was restored. To understand why Hachiko resonated and continues to resonate requires sitting with a concept that doesn't translate cleanly into English. The Japanese word makoto is often rendered as sincerity or truthfulness, but it carries a depth that neither English word fully captures. Makoto is the quality of acting in accordance with your inner truth, without calculation, without expectation of reward. It is sincerity that does not require an audience. Hachiko's waiting was, in this framework, an expression of makoto. He did not wait because he expected a reward. He did not wait because someone told him to. He waited because his inner nature, his attachment to his owner, was so complete that the waiting itself was inevitable. The waiting was the love. There is also giri, often translated as social obligation or duty, which describes the moral debt that arises from receiving care or kindness. In traditional Japanese thought, one must repay one's obligations. Hachiko, who had been raised and cared for by Professor Ueno, was understood as acting out of giri, returning each day because to do otherwise would be to violate the fundamental moral bond between them. These are not abstract concepts to Japanese ears. They are felt vocabulary, and Hachiko embodied them without words. Over the decades, the area around the Hachiko exit, officially named Hachiko-guchi, or the Hachiko Gate, became a cultural institution independent of the story itself. It became the default meeting place for an entire city. Before mobile phones, before GPS, before the ability to locate someone in real time, people arranged to meet at Hachiko. It was the understood, reliable, unconditional meeting point. You stood at Hachiko. You waited. Eventually, the person came. There is a quiet irony in this. The statue of a dog famous for waiting became the place where everyone waits. The architecture of the story embedded itself into the city's social fabric. Hachiko became a verb in the informal sense. Hachiko de makiawas. Let's meet at Hachiko. When the new Scramble Square skyscraper was built nearby, developers were careful to preserve the sightline to the statue. When the surrounding area underwent renovation, the location of the statue was treated as a fixed coordinate, the thing around which the rest of the city moved. Tokyo is a city that changes constantly. Buildings are demolished and rebuilt on 20-year cycles. Districts are transformed within a generation. Hachiko does not move. The relationship between contemporary Japan and Hachiko is layered in a way that is easy for outsiders to miss. For older generations, those who grew up in the post-war period, Hachiko belongs to a landscape of national reconstruction. The rebuilt statue, the resilience of the story through wartime destruction, the dog's association with loyalty and endurance. These elements aligned with a post-war Japan trying to reconstitute its values on different terms than wartime nationalism, but still finding in loyalty and perseverance a usable moral vocabulary. For younger Japanese millennials and Generation Z, the relationship is more complicated. They know the story. They use the meeting place. But many are aware of how Hachiko's image was leveraged for nationalist purposes in the 1930s, and they hold the symbol with a certain careful ambivalence. The loyalty is real. The political uses were not innocent. There is also a quiet, unexpressed dimension to the Hachiko story that many Japanese feel but rarely articulate to outsiders. The story is also, at its heart, a story about grief that doesn't know it's grief. Hachiko was not, in any human sense, mourning. He was acting according to his deepest patterns. But the effect, the spectacle of an animal waiting faithfully for someone who will never return, is a precise image of how grief operates. It keeps showing up. It doesn't understand the permanence of absence. Here is the gap this channel exists to describe. The tourist arrives at Hachiko and sees a beautiful story. Loyalty, love, a dog who waited. They take a photograph, perhaps tear up a little, share it online. They carry the story home as a piece of Japan they understood. A piece of Japan that confirmed what they already wanted to believe, that this culture values depth, fidelity, enduring attachment. The Japanese person standing next to them carries something heavier. They carry the knowledge that the original statue was melted for bullets. They carry the awareness that school children were once taught Hachiko as a model of imperial loyalty. They carry the ambivalence of loving a symbol that was also used. And underneath all of that, they carry the older, quieter feeling, the one that has nothing to do with ideology, that Hachiko is simply a true story about what it means to wait for someone who is gone. The story is the same. The wait is different. What is remarkable about Hachiko, what separates him from other national symbols, is that the emotional core of his story requires no cultural knowledge to access. You do not need to understand giri or makoto to be moved by the image of a dog standing at a train station exit, waiting. You do not need to know anything about Japanese history, Japanese aesthetics, or the Japanese language. The story speaks in a register that precedes all of that. This is, perhaps, why it has traveled so far. Hachiko has been depicted in films, novels, paintings, and children's books across dozens of countries. His story has been retold in cultures that share almost nothing else with Japan. Because the story's core devotion maintained past the point of rationality, love expressed as an act of returning is something every culture recognizes in its own terms. What the story does, when you know its full depth, is invite you back. It says, "There is more here than you saw the first time. Come and look again." The statue has not moved. Shibuya has transformed beyond recognition in the 9 decades since Hachiko died. The station that he knew, a modest wooden structure on the outskirts of Tokyo, is now a vast interchange connecting 8 railway and subway lines and moving over 3 million passengers every day. The neighborhood around it has been rebuilt multiple times. The buildings, the roads, the flow of people, all of it is different. The statue stands where it always stood. And every morning, people use it as a meeting point. They stand in front of it and wait for someone to arrive. They are, in a small way, reenacting the story. They are waiting at the place where waiting became meaningful. Hachiko didn't know he was teaching Japan anything. He didn't know he was becoming a symbol, a lesson, a mirror, a monument. He was doing something much simpler. He was showing up every day for someone he loved, because to do otherwise was not something he knew how to do. Maybe that's why we keep coming back to this small bronze dog in a city that never stops moving. Still waiting, still here.